You know, I was just thinking a while ago, sitting at supper this evening and having my health food salad with a glass of red wine, by the way. I hope you're all familiar with the most recent research, which says that Baba doesn't strike me dead for this one. That red wine in moderation is one of the best things to keep the heart and the bloodstream properly functioning. And I will bless Baba in the marvelous manner in which he comes along and somewhere or another lets you have these sort of little ego things that you get used to and sort of have a bad feeling about. And finally Baba calms you down and says, well, it's all right now. I was very happy to read that one. Very authoritative.
Yes.
Well, as I was having this lovely, healthful combination this evening, I was thinking to myself, my golly, what an incredible being we have the privilege of knowing, loving, being connected with. And one of the things that gradually happens to you as the years roll along, you begin looking back over preceding years, and you're sort of amazed, well, there was this big chunk of years that went especially into that particular topic. Gosh, there were some other years over there that were in a rather different field. And all of a sudden that reminds you, but my gosh, and now here we are, and I seem to be terribly occupied with this. And I was really reflecting upon the fact that in this marvelous, exciting, adventurous lifetime, hanging on to Baba's coattails and trying not to trip and fall off of the Dhamma and a few things like that. I spent really the first 7 years of my knowledge of the existence of Baba in a tremendous hustle with internal personal relationship with Baba. I really think that's the most important thing of all. Certainly, anybody who gets impatient with people who get very philosophical about Baba, or who concentrate too much on some other subject and bring you back and say, that's all trite, and it really is aside from the central theme. I don't argue with them the least little bit. With me, for 7 years, it was an absolute internal obsession. Who was Baba in relation to me? Why did he do that? Why did I feel this way about that? What would happen if I did something that might be against his will, inadvertently? Did I really want Baba's will? Did I approve of Baba's will? And that just went on almost 24 hours a day. I'm sure, even in my sleep, I was still arguing with myself about all of these tremendously earth-shaking internal things relating to my relationship with Baba. I think, really, that's the first major challenge with Baba. And then, when I finally met Baba face-to-face in '52, and shortly after that, you're all familiar with the fact that he got Ivy Deuce and myself with our nose burrowed into God Speaks. From that point on, for 10, 15 years, it was one project after another, dealing with words with Baba. And it just seemed to me that what Baba said about what creation was, what it's about, how it happened, the whole logic of the thing, constantly I was having my nose ground into that from all sorts of different directions. Having people carping at me from the side all the time. Oh, Don, don't be so intellectual. Get at the real heart of Baba, the feeling, the heart part of it, you know. And I'd get mad at them because I said, but it's Baba himself who said I had to do this particular part of it. So this just went on for a decade and a half, I guess probably about 2 decades. But then as I continued on with my health food salad and my red glass of wine this evening, I began to think, well, really in the last 2-3 years, in Baba's own way, I never have a sense of having any sort of control over which way the ship is going and how fast it's going, and whether it's going through high seas with a big wind or whether it's beautiful sunshine and moon at night, you know. This just all seems automatically, instinctively, to be Baba's will. I have very little to do with it. All I can do is to just sort of try to stay afloat and meet the challenges and scratch my head and try to be a little bit sane and sensible about it, hopefully, and maybe not plunge off of the deep end as it goes on. But these last several years, oddly enough, it seems to me more and more I become preoccupied with the implications of what Baba has laid out for the future. What about it? Well, really, that's what we're going to tackle a little bit this evening. As usual, I'm going to be selfish and sort of try to steer us around through a subject that more and more fascinates me. And I think probably the keynote to it, I find so many of the words, the phrases, the expressions, the glimmers in that absolutely revolutionary document, The Song of the New Life. Did it ever strike you that possibly this is the equivalent of the Declaration of the Independence and the Marseillaise all put together in one brief, succinct document, which I think we all have a tendency, at least I do. I don't know how many times I've read this over perhaps 30, perhaps even 40 years now, and just always thought, oh, well, that's splendid, it's a lovely sort of poetic thing, and put it aside. But about 2 years ago, when I thought, well, now it's high time that we really did a little bit of trying to mine out this subject to the new life, and read it over, and thought to myself, well, gee whiz, in about 2-3 weeks from now, we'll be sitting down together in a group in London, and there are going to be quite a few astute people, a lot more astute than I am about Baba, and we'll be batting this back and forth. So what really is Baba saying? I asked myself that for the first time. And as I started to concentrate on this document, I thought, my God, this is practically inflammatory. It's practically taking everything that we've regarded as sacrosanct, tossing it into the ash can, and starting over from scratch. I mean, really, it's I think, one of the most revolutionary documents I've ever read in my life. So, having whetted your appetite that far, let's get back to Adele's agenda, and let that simmer for a few minutes. What about a little bit of catching up on news in Europe? I understand that you had, from all accounts, certainly one of the greatest, or perhaps the greatest ever, Savas here in your area, in late June, early July. I can't remember exactly the days. As usual, you seem to have bewitched, charmed, and knocked everybody right off of the square edge of the area. So that was all pretty much as per normal. You know, I think it was probably you here who started this whole feeling that it'd be lovely every once in a while to have an occasion when Baba people could get together. Hey, nice, sweetie. Could get together and enjoy each other for a little bit more than 2 or 3 hours, or maybe for something like a buffet supper, and really spend some time together. So I think it was perhaps one of the French groups which did it for the first time on a very small experimental scale in Europe, and just about the time that you were having yours, what we all affectionately call the Juno group, which is sort of up on the edge of Brittany, in a charming little pastoral country town, had, for the second time in their history, the Savas reunion. And it was over a period of about 3 days. And it interested me tremendously because everything was left in the hands of a magnificent woman by the name of Gina Grimard, who is what I would call the mother figure for that part of France. Superb woman. A little bit shy, very intelligent, very warm. We just said, well, Gina, why don't you people put the thing together here, and maybe why they thought about it, delighted. So I was a little bit curious as to how they would handle it, because normally whenever we think about it as Savas, we think of something that's pretty well planned out. I know you people do an enormous amount of work in organizing it, thinking out what will mesh with what, the homework that's needed ahead of time to bring it to pass. So when we collected at Juno, everybody was just sort of milling around, and I waited for somebody to ring a gong or post a notice or something of that sort, but well, nothing like that happened. Not to carry it on too long, what just simply happened was that people were there, And after they got a little bit tired of waiting for something formal to begin, they started chatting with each other. Some wandered off there, and some wandered off to another place, and went on for a while. And it was time for supper, because this all started sort of late in the afternoon. And then after supper, I showed a film of Bob at the 1958 trip to Myrtle Beach. And I think that was about the only thing I really planned. The next day we sort of wondered, well, has Gina got up her sleeve? And somewhere around 10, 11 o'clock, she suggested, I think, to Anita Vieillard, that it'd be nice if Anita chatted a little bit about some of the things that she associated with Baba. And Anita went on for a little bit, and we suddenly realized that the rice was overcooking, so that created quite a flap in the background. Anita, as she got more and more interested in her memories, was carrying on, and we all realized the rice was getting softer and softer and softer in the kitchen. But you know, I mean, this was sort of part of the charm of the thing. I mean, here were things that were almost going in opposite, but it was very, very human. And then the afternoon, people again sort of sat around, and one or two things happened. But it was almost exactly the opposite of what I personally would have done. And yet, out of those 2.5 days together, there was such an enormous, rich interchange amongst people. Not too much in any sort of a formal presentation. At one point, she said, "Oh, there are a few people here who go back into the 30s and the 40s. Maybe they would like to talk a little bit about some of their impressions." And that was just about the total of the formality of what went on. But again, there's exactly, it struck me, the same sort of rich atmosphere, which is generated typically in the sort of savas that you have, and 2 or 3 others that I've attended in Georgia, in Norwich, in England, and so on, which were organized on a totally different basis. So I guess it just simply says that what Christ said, when 2 or 3 of you are gathered together in my name, I am with you. He certainly was there in that sort of context as well. So we decided this next year to have a rank exploratory project, totally different. I won't tell you too much about the history, even though that's fascinating in itself. We're going to have a savas itinéraire. Where's our French scholars around here? Anybody know how to translate that? Anyway, it's going to be a traveling savas. You know, the amazing thing is that Baba spent a lot of time down in the south of France and the north of Italy. And all those people coming through and saying, "Where did he stay in Cannes? Oh, I heard he went to Monaco. Do you know where he stayed there? Oh, there's that gorgeous spot over there in Portofino. I wonder if that house is still there. Which cave was it that he went to down out of Assisi?" People always coming through, you know, and you sit like a deadhead and say, "Well, I think it was sort of so-and-so." And every once in a while, somebody turns up who's done the proper research and knows exactly. But that part of the world, first of all, is beautiful and scenic. Secondly, there's gorgeous food and wine and cheese, and people like to come through and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So what we decided we would do on this particular occasion was say, all right, anybody who wants to, but you gotta get this all arranged far ahead of time, come down the first week in July, second week in July, I'm sorry, and we're going to have a savas itinéraire. Everybody's got to have an automobile or rent one, and we'll focus out of the area where the horse race track is between Nice and Cannes, because there are quite a few simple, very inexpensive little hotels there. First day, we're going to drive over on the freeway to Marseille, where there's an absolutely smashing Baba group, mostly of students, which functions under Adam Yvonne Anthony, who met Baba in the 50s and got in touch with him just after World War II. We'll spend the day and the afternoon with her, come back in the evening. The following day, we'll all drive over to Cannes, and we'll see the 2 locations where Baba and the women and the men Mandali stayed for weeks and weeks, actually. Absolutely a super stunning, smashing location. And then have lunch in one of those bistros along the Bay of Cannes there. third day, we'll do something that certainly Baba, with his love for picnics with the women module, he must have done. We'll drive back up into those beautiful, magnificent primitive mountains in back of the Nice Town area, and we'll have a picnic lunch together. The fourth day is just about Silence Day, so everybody's got to be silent at some point, or diet, or whatever they think, or else they can go to the gambling casino in Monte Carlo and play the roulette machine, or something really soul-searching and uplifting, you know, to help things along.
Drink red wine.
And drink a bit of red wine, very good for the cholesterol. The fifth day, we'll set out a little bit earlier on the freeway and go to Portofino, and then those which want to continue on will go a sixth day onto Assisi, and wherever the spirit moves from there. Well, as soon as this idea was broached, you cannot imagine the unanimous enthusiasm with which it was met absolutely everywhere. Everybody said, oh my gosh, all my life I wanted to spend several days vacationing in Italy. So after Assisi, I'm going down to the boot, I'm going on to Sicily and see what the mafia is about. Or I wanted to see the Dalmatian coastline in Yugoslavia and eat some of those fine, lovely crab and so on. So everybody's got their own idea what they're going to pin together with this Sabas itinerary. So, if any of you happen to be free after your glorious time here and feel again to go on the Sabas itinerary, that will be going along. Well, things always stay interesting, don't they? A lot of people are imaginative and creative. They also manage to have a pretty good time, I find out, one way or another, very often. So, groups are doing well. The publication that comes out over there, Nephew, once in a while you see that as well. It's quite a bright, sprightly thing. Every once in a while when I get through, I tell you a little bit about publications and translations. You know, the big project has been translating Baba's discourses into French, German, Spanish. All three of them are 99.9% done now. And the fine editing has been done. Erish, Val not two, and Chris Flagg. I thought I'd done it again. Flagg Chris. I always invert that. Are going over the last fine tuning points on the English version, which has to come out in the new edition. And then they will send us at the last minute theirs to be checked against translations. We have the French edition, guaranteed financially. We have two publishers interested in the Spanish edition, one in Mexico City, the other in Buenos Aires. And the German edition, we found impossible. So that project is really very, very close to condition. Yes, that's being done with a very fine tooth. Fortunately, for the sake of all this, they spot very few changes. It's all very carefully. So, you should all be happy to hear that that will have passed through the people closest to on these philosophical matters. There is also a French translation of This Book Humanity, which is supposed to be published this winter by the best esoteric publisher in France, Edition Robert Laffont. We have two or three other smaller projects in the wind because these people who speak foreign languages are saying, well, Baba gave these all out in English. We love Baba, but after all, many of us have great difficulty with English, and we would like some things in our language. To you, this doesn't seem like a big problem, but I can assure you, to them they feel like they are still souls crying out in the wilderness. It is really an acute problem, and I admire the stamina and the determination of how these people, in their own foreign languages, continue this intense love and devotion for Baba, even without that further concrete point of contact.
What about an English listener?
English Listen to Humanity, I had just negotiated with Don Mead, the contract, to republish it. They were the ones Baba originally selected for it. And just as we were signing the contract, out of the clean blue sky, the owners decided to sell it to that Tennessee Bible publishing company. And it just sort of seemed obvious that was not the right contact. So I took it. I'm sorry, I've got nothing against the Bible, you know. Quite the contrary, I think it's a great book. But it just didn't seem right, excuse me, for being so facetious. So I took it upon myself, and if it was the wrong decision, I'm totally to blame. So at that point, I took up with Robert Laffont the possibility of publishing it in Canada, but their Canadian arm said, no, it's too far out of our bailiwick. And so we have an extremely good quote of all things to republish, photocopy republished in the south of France. $2,000 cheaper than the price quoted by Don 2 years ago, which surprises me. So maybe France is getting a little bit more practical.
What about Harper's?
Harper Row have pulled back. They had tremendous economic problems, and so they pulled back from a large percentage of their esoteric editions. All of the ones that they did of things related to Baba have now gone into out of print.
Was that a really good seller?
What's that?
Was Listen to Humanity a good seller?
Well, let's say over the years, it has always sold constantly. But it doesn't sell like the memoirs of Sharon or somebody like that.
But then there's another existing new humanity.
Well, then we go into.
That's another.
I think that something new has hit me in my life since I was last chatting with you. Did I say anything about a personal computer the last time I saw you? I did? I didn't? Well, I tell you, the thing that absolutely started driving me crazy was all of my friends would change their addresses and telephone numbers. Then you try a loose leaf one, and that's always changing so much that gets confused, and I just got boggled. So that began making me think I could do something about this. And then personal business letters about things to do with my own private investments that I couldn't give to the secretary of the office. And writing those out laboriously long. And then when we started doing the translations, and the different translators kept peppering me with questions about what would Baba mean by that. Gee, Don, that must be a mistake, and so on. And I would write this out laboriously longhand and then photocopy it and send it to 2 other translators and on to India so they could check my mental aberrations. I knew this was mind-boggling. And I've got to do something about this. And I've always thought, well, if I don't do something about the computer in this lifetime, God knows I'm going to have to do it in the next one. So maybe I better get on with it this lifetime. I have just sort of a little bit of a jump on some of my grandnieces and nephews who are getting so bright about these things. So I bought one, and I struggled, and about every hour or so, almost everything was I would scratch at it, and I would try this, and I would try that, and nothing would work, and I'd go to sleep, and it would be horribly frustrating. Next morning, I'd wake up, and they're absolutely amazing, what your unconscious does. I'm sure yours works better than mine did. My God, now then I stopped to think of it. What I did at that point wasn't terribly logical. Should I have done that? Well, overnight, some little worm, had gone around and said, no, Stevens, that wasn't too bright what you did. So I tried the other thing. Golly, it always worked. And then a couple of months' time, I taught myself how to use this classic computer. It saved my life. So, in July, when we just got into this marvelous reunion, I came down to Paris, and I invited go there that home to Sears, and introduce this project. I invited him, about two-thirds of the way through dinner, he was sort of running himself down. He said, you know, nobody reads esoteric books anymore. And he said, I think people are really looking for the truth. And he said, well, I disagree with you. I have contact with a lot of people all over the world. And I think more and more and more people constantly are looking for the truth. It's not in exactly the ways that they did it in the 60s and the early 70s, but they are still looking for the truth in a slightly different idiom. They said that, I don't know whether it's the economic conditions or what, but our esoteric conditions are not selling very well. And I really sometimes wonder what I've done with my whole life. I just feel like I'm an old clochard. Any of you know what a clochard is? Well, if you ever travel to Paris, especially in the wintertime, and you're going along a street pretty late at night and it's cold and rainy and threatening to snow, all of a sudden you almost trip over somebody who's lying down on the sidewalk on a grating. And this turns out to be a grating that comes up from the subway down below, which is always warmer. And these poor, very, very desperate, destitute people sleep on the gratings in the wintertime for a little bit of warmth. They are what the French call the clochard. They're ragged, they're ill-kept, they all drink much too much red wine. And other things. And they really are the dregs of humanity. So when he said, I sometimes just feel like an old clochard, I got mad. I wanted to blow him up. Because here's a fine man who has devoted his whole lifetime to esoteric things, getting together one of the finest collections of things about truth and about God that exists in Europe. And to hear him in his late 50s, early 60s, express a sense of frustration that he feels like an old clochard, I wanted to kick him for his own lack of estimation of his own word. Father says you have to give value to yourself before you have got to be fair and honest. Value yourself, and you can value another. Well, I believe it's very strong. I said, don't say that. Everybody that I know in France, everybody that I have contact with, knows your particular collection that you have been an editor. And I said, you are the person who is recognized as the authority in this field. The great at that point, I was smiling at him, and he wasn't looking at her just as much as getting some more of this. This is what he needs, you know, sort of thing. And so, after a little bit, he smiled a little bit, and to cheer up a little bit. And then he said something that really shook me. You know, I'm getting very young. I don't say there are people who are looking for much contact directly. I know you're not my person. I would really give that to offer something real bad. These people looking for who you are in my career. He said it with such beauty, simplicity, honesty, directness, real meaning, that it touched me very, very deeply. I think that just went through my mind all night as I slept. The sincerity of it, and the challenge that it presented to me. And so, the next day as I woke up, I began to think to myself, well, God, for pity's sake. Now, yes, you kid yourself into feeling that you've done a little bit of work on Baba's word, and a little bit of work trying to keep in contact with people who are drawn to Baba. And, you know, I was being a little bit brutal with myself. But really, if you were in this man's position, knowing Baba and the source of truth as you do, and what you know about what Baba has brought into creation, it's the source of truth, what would you try to do at this point, coming to the close of a career, if you were in Mazier's shoes? And, of course, my first reaction was saying, gee whiz, I've done everything I could possibly dream up to do. I was, you know, just trying to justify myself where I was and what I had done. But somewhere or another, the sincerity of that man's statement just wouldn't let it rest. So it went on for another 24 hours. And I started to think the following days, well, good heavens, Don, this has to be Baba who is prodding you somewhere or another. What would you say? What is the significance of Baba? What is a keynote for people for the future? And all of a sudden, the phrase, the new humanity how many people know in this world that Baba says that there is a new humanity, which is here, which is manifesting, and which has some quite drastically different characteristics from the old humanity, of which I was an all too evident part, but it was pretty tough trying to get anywhere in relation to inner spiritual progress. When I was in my late teens and 20s and so on, just beginning to try to do something. Baba says it. And I began to ask myself, how seriously, Don, have you taken the discourse on the new humanity? I read it a great many times. And all of a sudden I began to think, the new humanity, the new life. I can't remember how many times I pestered poor old Arish. Well, Arish, what's the significance of the new life? And Arish would sort of look puzzled, and his tapes, and we've got the transcript and tales from the new life. Arish pours out honestly his heart a little bit. You know, one of the strange things about the Mandali living with Baba that close, the intimacy and the intensity of that personal relationship is so real, so strong, so overwhelming that to put words to it or concepts to it, it's often more difficult for them than it is for Adele and me. And I know I'm no brainstormer. I'm sure neither one of us can get too far with it, but we can still do a better job lots of times in the Mandali. We've been living so close in the intensity of the light of reality, of Baba himself. So I thought, gosh, I really never put these two things side by side before. And why didn't I? How stupid can you get? Does the new humanity have anything to do with the new life? I have never thought to put those two obvious similarities together. And then I began to think, two things that famous principles adventuresome things that has ever happened on the face of this globe. And our dear old Baba has stirred it all up. And maybe we're just beginning to sniff some of the odor of it. So, over the period of the last 2 years, I've gotten more and more fascinated again with the new life, and there's a study group in London who's been working on it now for a year and a half, the new life. And when I did my homework just over a year ago, sitting down supposedly in the quiet month of August, and went back and began to examine the source material of what we have on the new life, I always thought I was fairly close to Baba and fairly close to the Mandali, and always thought I was deeply interested in the new life. But when I tried to do a fairly good, solid, wearing out of the seat of your pants, boning up on the subject, with what is available, the same way I used to have to do in a college course, I was astonished at the material available and the light that began to throw on the subject. So on this second day after Maziere had made this statement, I said, gee whiz, I don't have time or energy. When I finished off the last of the editing on Man's Search for Certainty, I said, never again, never again. My old gray hair, I'm too old, I'm worn out, I've got too many other things. I'll never do another literary project. But I was so stirred up by Maziere in the 48 hours when something was hammering at me inside, and these 4 or 5 things that suddenly flocculated together, suddenly crystallized out. If you ever watched an oversaturated chemical solution, you put a seed crystal in, and all of a sudden, wham, all the crystals form spontaneously. I was that oversaturated crystalline solution, and it all suddenly crystallized, and it was terribly exciting. So I said, oh God, it just boggles me, it makes me tired out just to think of what is involved, even trying to write out some of the key concepts. So I said to myself, the only thing I can possibly do, and now we get to Adele's part of the story, I said, well, the old trusty computer. And so, but I have the idea, since I had this instrument just over a year, that if I tried to do anything creative, something as mechanical as a computer would block off the creative thoughts. I had that so firmly planted in mind, I've never tried even the slightest creative thing. But the weekend came along, and I thought, the only way I can get these things already in my mind down, and not just wear myself out in the short time that I've got, is quickly to tap it out on the computer. Because now, with my 6 fingers on the computer, I can write and correct faster than I can do it longhand. So I made the experiment, and after 2 days, I was astonished to find out that I could write creative things much more freely on the computer than I could write longhand. Well, let's not go into the ins and outs of it, but that was sort of encouraging. So I went back to work, and the next weekend I did some more. And first thing you know, I had a couple of, I thought, terribly exciting chapters that were all written out there. So I thought, well, I don't know. Bob, it's all in your hands. You know, I said the customary things, the customary phrases. Leave it in Bob's hands. Bob knows what he wants, you know. And I took a week vacation. I sat at the computer about 16, 18 hours a day, and after 9 days I had about 160 pages of normal book size, all done on the blessed old computer. So there it was, the subject run out, and I thought to myself, well, what sort of a title? And immediately stuck in my mind, the title ought to be, Listen, the New Humanity.
Ninth grade?
So, I thought, oh my God, that's plagiarism. I trust it's going to have my throat and my liver and all of the rest of my vital organs. I better confess up to Monty and get the cat calls and the nose and the whatnot. Steve, my God, now, I mean, some things after all just shouldn't be. But nevertheless, I wrote to Monty and said, Monty, I don't know how this happened, but Bob and the new life and the new humanity and a lot of things in Maziere all of a sudden got me excited, and I seem to be in another literary project. I would like to call it Listen to the New Humanity, and I would like to trust permission to quote liberally from the New Humanity discourse, from Listen to Humanity, from other discourses, from God Speaks if necessary, and Tales from the New Life. Come back an enthusiastic reply. We're all with you. So, at any rate, so then I said to the Marseille group and the group in London, look, would you sit down for several times with me and let's go over it together. You've got your independent outside viewpoint on this, but you know this material pretty well now, and let's check it together. And I saw the computer, you know, there's something you call justification of text. That's the French term for it. I don't know what.
It's the
Right,
standard.
get the file.
Justification, you know, this side comes out even just as this
Right,
side.
yes, just file, left, yes.
Yeah, they're both absolutely linear, and it's just like it was a printed job. I thought, my golly, this looks so beautiful. What's the sense of going all through the hassle of going to a printer and so on? I just ought to take this and we'll photocopy it and put out an underground edition ourselves. And then when I thought about that and talked to a couple of people, they got, you know, all you have to do is mention the word underground to people, and boy, you get a reaction. We've got a lot of firefighters who are mama lovers. So they immediately liked the idea. But then when I got into the middle of this, and Hervé in the Kangxi Mayor group, who works in public relations and so on, got lots of contacts, he took the script. It was printed on big pages like that, but put into smaller size. It would be about 160 pages of the pocket edition. A small, but a nice sized little book. Said, Hervé, get one of your best, real economic, real practical, down-to-earth printers to give us a quote on 1,000 copies of this, bound up in a paperback edition. Hervé came back, I couldn't believe it, 90 cents to $1.20 a copy, bound as a regular paper. And you can see it. My gosh, I almost fell over. And then I began to think, gee whiz, after all, sheets that size, that's not exactly a pocket edition. You know, it's not very convenient. So I've been trying for 1 year after I got something recorded onto a diskette, and this size every once in a while. I thought, no, I wish I had printed those lines a little bit smaller and fewer lines per page, and every once in a while I'd have a bright idea. I'm not an expert on computers, I don't know anything about them, but I'd give my machine a command to change this and see what turned out. Every single time, the machine tossed my new command into the ash can and insisted on doing it the way my original command was. So there I was thinking to myself, so I guess we're just going to have to print it in that inefficient size. And I went down to Paris and was talking to somebody, how do I get this text off of my little portable computer over here? And he mentioned magic words like ashi, and ashi is another type of a language. And all of a sudden, you know how Baba does these things. Absolutely uncanny. I had to have an answer at this point. When you translate it into a different computer language, I suddenly thought, maybe if I translate it into that language and retranslate it back into scripted language, maybe it'll take the new scripted command. So I set it all up, you know. It's really fascinating setting up these experiments and see what's going to roll out. It seems like a long way from Baba in the universe, doesn't it? We've almost got to the end of this. This is too good. I have to share it with you. So here we are. After a year of all of this trial and error every once in a while and getting nowhere, I changed it into ashi. And then I gave the instrument the command to translate it back into scripted with the new dimensions and so on. So the machine, whenever it's doing its work by itself, there's a little grunt, grunt, grinding noise where the disc is turning, and there's a little red light that's flashing on and off to let me know that the heart's beating and things are ticking over. And so this was all went on for 10, 15 seconds, and I thought, well, something's happening. And all of a sudden, the grunt, grinding stops. The flashing light goes off. The instrument's dead. Oh my God, now I've done it. I've promoted, I've created one of these terrible breakdowns where you fed in a totally illogical thing and the machine gives up the ghost and said, if I've got a nitwit handling this, I give up. And you've got to go to an expert to get the thing working again. So I thought, I've got all of this work, I don't know what to do. I was just absolutely, totally sick at heart. Here I was in the middle of it.
What that instrument was?
I'm not going to tell you the instrument. I'm going to tell you what happened then, because that's the important thing. Here I was, absolutely heart sick. 15 seconds roughly. All of a sudden, the light starts flashing, the grunting starts again. In about 3 seconds, here is my manuscript in the new format, with the short lines and everything. It's a Tandy Shack Model 3. TRS-80 Model 3. So the end of the story is there. In 2 minutes now I can take a whole chapter from this size to the new little size. And somewhere around Christmas to New Year we'll have the underground edition out. But you see, this is to me what is fascinating. This is stage 3. And as I've been working on all of this, I've been saying to myself, you know, I think everybody is probably just exactly like Stevens. I hope a lot brighter than me, but probably you get pushed through the same phases. The first great, big, enormous challenge is personal, one-to-one, interrelationship to Baba. What does he mean to me? What is this man? What is the reality? How do I stack up inside in the way that I work in relation to the reality and what Baba tells us truth is in a long time? How am I going to get there? How am I going to get all these veils and the sanskaras finally kicked into the ash can so that I can get where Baba says I've got to go? And that is such a tremendous, tremendous challenge that it just keeps one's nose to the grindstone. And every once in a while, an individual also picks up Baba's words and gets deeply involved in the philosophy of what Baba says truth is. Where did creation come from? How did it happen? What's the purpose of creation? What are human beings? What are we now in all of this? Where are we going? And so the whole philosophical aspect of the thing also is an enormous challenge. But in these last couple of years, especially, I wondered again and again and more times, aren't we also going to have to start to come to grips with a third major aspect of this extraordinarily kaleidoscopic being, which is what the avatar is? He covers everything. And start to wrestle with the implications of the future. What has the avatar laid out for the future, not just for me, but for humanity, for mankind? And how's he going about it? How often do we think about that? I've got to be terribly conscious about that, just in this recent past. So it was for that reason that I thought, well, here I'll be with these beloved people, two of my oldest and closest friends, Phyllis and Adele. I'm just terribly sorry that sweet Phyllis isn't with us tonight. So
We all are.
So, well, she's got the very, very best of all, Baba, right by her side. So, at any rate, I said, well, why not just take this absolutely key revolutionary document, the Song of the New Life, Meher Baba and his companions, and just line by line, take it up together. Gosh, I don't think we've got time for too many lines.
We always have time for that.
Why don't we maybe select a few of the lines out from here? I think what I'd like to ask, Chris, how's your eyesight? Could you just read it through for us all, and then we'll pick out a few of the terribly pungent revolutionary lines in that, and sort of about a few ideas back and forth.
I did it all.
Yarn?
He's a good voice.
We're batting things back and forth so fast, I'm going to ask John Page to do it.
He's a good.
I can get it to him real fast here. Anyway, thanks for all the suggestions.
Do you want all of it read?
It's not going to be that bad, I hope.
No.
Sure. Let's read it all through. And remember, as we read it through this time, for heaven's sake, think of it as a complete revolution as far as many, many of the things that we have thought about life.
Isn't this just about the time when Baba gave that to November 14th?
After we read it through.
This was given yesterday,
November
November 14th, 1949.
Yeah,
Now that's pretty good timing, isn't it?
just perfect.
How about that? And I understand you very recently read it through and did a good deal of thinking
Yes,
on that.
we did have Steve
occasion.
O'Cloris.
So we've got a lot of things that seem to indicate it's high time, John. Shall we try?
Song of the New Life of Meher Baba and his companions. Listen to the silent words of Meher Baba. The life story of all lovers of God is based on the practice of these words. If you are serious about living this new life, then wholeheartedly renounce this ephemeral existence. We have taken to this life in which we rely only on God. In this, our will, to do or die, is strengthened by the oath taken. We are merely singing the song of hopelessness. We are inviting all calamities and difficulties. We neither wail over lost hopes, nor complain about broken promises. We neither covet honor, nor shun disgrace. Backbiting we know not, nor do we fear anyone. This is now the color of our new life. No confusion in the mind now, nor any ties left. Pride, anger, lust, and greed we know not. We have no religion, nor care for physical and mental fads. The Sheikh and the Brahmin, typifying all castes and creeds, are now sailing in the same boat. There is no small or great now for us all. The questions of disciple, master, or godhood no longer arise. Brotherliness or fellow feeling is the link that exists, and this contributes to our present enjoyment of suffering. This world or the next, hell or heaven, we no longer carry about. We no longer bother about. Shaktis and cities, occultism and miracles, we no longer think of. All these false impressions for us have been purged from the mind. What has value and importance for us now is to live in the active present. Dear ones, take seriously the words of Baba when he says, "Although now I am on the same level with you all, yet all orders from me, good, bad, extraordinary, you should carry out immediately, leaving the result to God. Even if the heavens fall, do not let go the hand of truth. Let despair and disappointment ravage and destroy the garden of your life. You beautify it once again by the seedlings of contentment and self-sufficiency. Even if your heart is cut to bits, let there be a smile on your lips. Here I divulge to you a point worth noting. Hidden in your penniless hands is treasure untold. Your beggarly life will be the envy of kings. God exists indeed, and true are the prophets. Every cycle has an avatar, and every moment has a Wali. For us, however, it is only hopelessness and helplessness. How else should I tell you what our new life is?
Well, pretty enigmatic statements in that. Well, we've got about 10 copies that we can pass around through, and so you have a chance to look over somebody's shoulder and sort of think about some of these words as we talk for a few minutes. I remember my own reaction when I first read it through. I thought, well, gee, that's quite an amazing poem. But, you know, there were so many things in it that I couldn't quite fathom, and they just couldn't stick somewhere or another. And I just didn't have either the energy or the imagination or the heart to tackle some of the troublesome expressions in there. And, you know, I think it's high time for us now to start taking those for real and saying, well, really, what was Baba getting at? I'd like to pose the hypothesis to you, and I think this is the most important thing that's happened in my life in the last 2 years. I feel I am now absolutely dead convinced that in the new life with the companions, Baba was laying down the form for the existence, living of the new humanity in the new age. I think it is there that we will find in our research work, our feeling in, our intuiting into what went on, enormously important forms for the future. And I think one of the great keys to that is this song of a new life. And I think we've got to start meditating and come to grips with some of the things that seem so ununderstandable and puzzling there. I think, you know, Baba had this read out or sung out. Anybody know how to sing this? There's some music for it. Does anybody sing?
Yes, Mary sing.
Could you practice up in the back of your mind, saying maybe the last couple of stanzas, and then when we chat a little bit, then we'll say, all right, Mary, what about it? Can you give us the last two vocally?
I write a song about the new life based on the song.
Based on the song.
Yeah, but not this word for word.
Not word for word.
Do you remember the tune?
No, I thought there was a tune which was done in India because it was often chanted out in India as well as said out by the Mongolians. But yours wasn't that original one. I see. Well, maybe someday we can get somebody from India who still remembers the tune to do a recording for us. I think it'd be a good research project at any rate. Well, at any rate, shall we go back? I immediately marked one line in the first stanza. I don't think it's too earth-shaking, the particular one I marked. Let me be selfish, if I may, then wholeheartedly renounce this ephemeral existence. You know, really, Baba made one of the most complete breaks that I have ever read about. Any point in my life have I ever heard of such a complete break in living habits and connections as Baba insisted on for the Mongoli who went with him. So this renunciation of this ephemeral existence was a terribly key point. But do you think that that is necessarily something that he intends to carry over into the new life of the new humanity?
I think whatever Baba did was just initiating a wave that would have its repercussions. I mean, there was nothing that he did that didn't have that some kind of resonance in the universe itself. His new life was indeed the model, perfect model. I mean, the resonances we have yet to ourselves experience and live.
So Adele is saying to us that she feels what Baba lived through in the new life is quite literally the model for the new life, the new humanity. But it lays out the significant parts. So I guess Adele would say she really thinks that Baba intends the new humanity to renounce this ephemeral existence. One way or another, she says. Anybody want to argue with Adele? She's in real good humor this evening. You should take it. She always does. Yes.
The line just before it pretty well says that. Just pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm. What about, what's the sense of renunciation? You know, this is an old dog or an old cat that comes up every once in a while. In fact, Bob, in one of his discourses, I think clarifies pretty well what real renunciation is. Any of you happen to remember that? But I think maybe it also applies pretty well here.
Well, I think when Baba says to renounce our ephemeral existence, it means that existence which is ephemeral, that changing, shadowy existence, that existence that isn't rooted and based in our relationship to Him, that isn't rooted in God.
Mm-hmm.
I think it certainly doesn't mean that we're to become external renunciates and travel like fakirs around the countryside.
Yeah.
You remember when he told Natural
Can you all hear Adele over there? Because I think you're pretty far away.
Natural Bala wrote and said that he was ready to renounce his this ephemeral existence, and Baba replied, "The only thing I want you to renounce is your false self."
No, it's your present attitude.
Your present what?
Attitude.
Your present attitude. Your false self.
Well, you have one more.
Renunciation means to turn away from. And, I don't know how else to look at that, but to say, I mean, if you're involved in the world, somehow internally you got to, turn away from that and become focused on God or
truth,
reality, or whatever, reality.
It's really important.
Turn away from what's going on out here in the sense life and move inwards.
That's not exactly true. Because you have to be out there functioning.
We have to be in the world, but not of the world. Perhaps he means by.
You have to turn away from means not pay attention to. But you still have to live. That's where you live your karma. It's out there.
Sure.
That's how you love is out there. That's who you not Ganesha is out there. Every person you meet on the street.
John?
Well, we have, yes, Mark.
Are you looking for one of the seven realities, which is where Baba talks of the only real renunciation?
What was that one, Mark?
The only real renunciation is the renunciation of indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. I'm not sure if I have...
Got a pretty good memory.
I'm not sure it's exactly right, but...
Renunciation of low desires.
Right.
So, well, we have pretty much, I think, a consensus that renunciation, as far as Baba is concerned, is not by any means living the life of a hermit, continuing to live in the world, but in some way directing the focus of one's attention on the reality towards which one is going. And for John, that is primarily relationship with Baba himself as the highest priority. The particular little quote from the discourses that I think adds maybe a little tiny grain more into that, and there is a little section where Baba discusses specifically renunciation and its effect on sanskaras. And he says that in external renunciation is of absolutely no value if it does not lead to the goal of internal renunciation. In other words, giving up of internal desires. This apparently is what Baba means, which fits in with what you were all saying. Live in the world, but don't be absorbed by those problems in the world. Yes.
Baba, I think, summed up renunciation in his phrase, being is dying by loving. It's putting a death to our false self by identifying with who love.
Certainly, Baba again and again and again and again points out the unique power and role of love in individual life, especially the life of the aspirant. You have another one?
Yeah. I seem to remember reading in either God Speaks or somewhere where in order to renounce, that I'm trying to think, there was Vairag and Vairag renunciation, there's two different types.
Vairag and Vairag.
Yeah, right. And that there is a period where, in the beginning, where there is an external renunciation that goes on. And then the internal can happen. But the aspirant has to withdraw from the world for a short period of time.
I'm not absolutely sure that Baba implies that it has to be in that sequence. It can be in that sequence. But there are so many cases also of individuals where you see people deeply drawn to Baba. Their external life goes on just exactly as it always did. They don't give up any automobile. They don't change the size of their house. They don't change their lifestyle. But the real value has gone into a different level of their own being. Well, unfortunately, just that one subject I know could carry us the whole evening, but I insist there are at least 3 or 4 lines that we've just got to trot in front of you and make your hackles rise. What about this business in the next stanza, too? We are merrily singing the song of hopelessness. Isn't this exactly the opposite of what a good spiritual master says? The person who is hopeless is hopeless. How under the sun can you have any progress in an individual who has given up hope? And here, in this great song of the new life, Baba says we are merrily singing the song of hopelessness. Isn't this shocking? I think it's take it for real. Is Baba crazy? Did he get Ghani? He gave Ghani the key concepts he wanted. Ghani went off and did some composing, brought it back to Baba. Baba says, we got to change this, we got to change that. So it's Baba through the words of Ghani. But did both of them go stark staring mad? What happens here? Anybody got an idea of, yes, please.
Quote of Francis Rabelais comes to mind. That is, one of his husbands says, give up hope. There is no death worse than expectancy.
What does that mean? Doesn't that just put another lovely Francis Brabazon poetic question mark into the middle of the font?
I think, well, for me, that directly relates to the fact that there really isn't anywhere in particular to get to. We are there, but we are not aware of it. So we have to make ourselves aware of what already is, as opposed to getting to somewhere or not. And that's enigmatic.
It's too enigmatic for me. I love Francis's words, but I'd like to push to, let's say, maybe still one further layer in this. I don't decry what you're saying. Francis's words, in my opinion, are dead spot on. But what does that mean to us if we've got John Page here, who is hoping to get a new copier for the office or raise more funds for a new center one day? All of these things that need doing. Should he give up hope? Just say, oh, I don't hope anymore. I don't do anything about it. Yes,
but
please.
he should surrender. I think that's the basis underlying it, is the idea that we're supposed to surrender to Baba's will. We're supposed to try our best, but again, the results are his, and when we are expecting, when we are hoping for things to go our way, then we aren't surrendering.
I think we're getting further and further all the time. What do you like to add to that?
Okay, I think sometimes hope can kind of slide over into desire. And I look at when...
How about that?
Hope
I'm going
slides
to stop you right there. That important word. You're linking hope and desire. Think about what she's saying for a moment. Hope and desire, she's saying instinctively. All right, then what do you want to say about desire? Is that naughty?
when you slide over into desire, you're more likely to have your ego involved in it. Hope can be a totally unselfish thing, but desires usually have at least an element of selfishness in them.
Most of my hopes are awful selfish, I've got to say.
That's what I said. I think a lot of times hope slides over into desire. And I think at the point where it slides over into desire, you could say, we're merely singing the song of desirelessness. Mm-hmm. We want to live without our desires, but with the will of Baba.
Yeah, I think this is the key linkage, to me at least. I would like to suggest, I feel very, very deeply that Baba is aiming just exactly at this linkage between hope, desire. What is desire? Baba's terribly clear about it. Desire is the result of a sanskaric impression, and this is exactly what we've got to root out. So it's not in the sense of hopeless, there's nothing to be done, the world is blah, we've got lousy politicians, the economic scene's a mess, Reagan has done too much borrowing and so on, you know. And so you give up hope, you say, a powder on it, is that the right expression?
That's despair though, Don. It's not hopelessness, it's despair.
All right, but you know, usually when you say hopeless, you're talking about a despairing individual. When my mother would just suddenly get hopeless after the death of my father, because things were really tough, she was despairing. It was really a desperate situation. But again, from Baba's standpoint, we have to read, I think, a word like that, bearing in mind what Baba has said are the key outlines of creation, what's going on. Our hopes are almost always related to desire pattern, something we want. And the desire pattern is this sanskaric thing that Baba says all of human existence is simply total waste of one's psychic energy. You had another one.
It says down here in the 8th stanza, let despair and disappointment ravage and destroy the garden.
Oh, that's one of the biggest knocks of all. Don't you bring that up yet. You get everybody. That's the choice, right? John, what were you going to say?
Well, I think that the hopes and desires are brothers and sisters, and I think that hopes are sort of a more subtle, or a little more refined, maybe not quite as gross or not quite as blatant, but they all have the same root. Mm-hmm. And of course, that root says that I'm incomplete now, and I'll be more complete, or I'll definitely feel better when or if something else is acquired, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and of course it's all rooted in falsehood. And I don't think giving that up means that we become despairing. It just means that we put very little trust, or we don't hold any hopes close to us.
What about the possibility of a concept of acting, or the joy of acting, in a situation which obviously demands something? Not because I hope for it, but you see something, it's obvious that's got to be done. You pitch in, and you enjoy doing it. Isn't this possibly even more exciting than to act from a hope basis? I think this is...
I feel like we can't say well, the same way. You not control our destiny, you know, like the same way. Our destiny is controlled by Creator, right? So I mean, hopeless to even like say well, like you know, you wish me, you just have to say well, it's in the drive hopelessness, like saying that, you know, just like you know, we don't control our destiny. We have to be hopeless because we don't have control what happened to us, right? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes, you put it on an absolute basis that it is God or destiny or creation which really controls what we are doing. So hope is sort of out of the window.
We hopeless because what happened is like just happened. We cannot control what happened to us, you know. So we hopeless. You know?
Yeah. This is a very intriguing concept. It can also be a very frustrating one. And an awful lot, I think, needs to be exchanged on that particular subject. But if we get into that one tonight, we're just not going to go any further. But I would like to propose sometime we sit down and talk on this key word, destiny. I'd love to have a good jam session on that subject. What is involved in the word destiny? But please, not tonight, because we just can't. It's too huge a topic. You're talking too much. I'm not going to let you talk this time, okay? I'm sorry. I just have to get... So I'm fine, Adele.
One
Yes.
quote from Bob, the highest of the high declaration. He said, if I am the highest of the high, my rule demands that instead of fulfilling your desires, that I strip you of your longings and possessions.
Yes, absolutely. How many times I've thought of that and wondered if he'd make me give up my lovely apartment that I love. But not for the whole evening. I didn't mean that for the whole evening. What about this one? Isn't this sort of brash and bravado? We're inviting all calamities and difficulties. Isn't that a ridiculous thing? Suppose Chris says to Christine, Christine, I'm going to take that seriously. I hope that car develops a flat tire. I hope the chimney develops a clog and that we smoke up the living room. Inviting all calamities and difficulties. Well, yeah, isn't that brash? What do you think about it, Adele?
Well, do you suppose that if an Easterner were asked that, they'd more immediately think of the three aspects of God: preservation, destruction, and creation? I think that this is definitely an aspect of God, calamities and difficulties, so that you invite God in his manifestation, no matter in what aspect.
What do you think of Adele's thought?
Well, what about carrying it one step further, or maybe this is another aspect of the same thing, just saying they're going to come anyway, and we'll just be better prepared to deal with them if we're expecting them.
Sure. Open them instead of trying to rebel against them. Sit down and go into a pouting rage. Adele says it's natural. You say they're going to come anyway, so
constantly have.
Let them come in.
Bob always said
it's the very theme of life is calamities, sufferings, earthquakes, hurricanes.
So in other words, instead of adopting a rebellious attitude, you adopt a positive, open attitude, and you say, all right, if that's the avatar's will, okay, there's got to be something there. What about that? Doesn't the avatar also possibly have a learning lesson for us in the negative things that he induces in our life? Isn't it also possible that in this enormous game that Baba makes so clear to us, of the negative and the positive absolutely having to balance out in our lives, that by God, if we're going to have this equilibrium finally, we've got to trust Baba's wisdom where some negative has got to come in.
You suppose Baba's preparing us for some really bad disasters in the future?
No, I don't. I don't. I really don't.
That's
It's evident in where Baba says about that true love is no
game of the
faint-hearted or the weak. It seems that the calamities and the difficulties certainly do strengthen us.
Sure, they certainly do. And it's a well-known principle in mysticism that the true aspirant must be strengthened internally by real crisis. And it used to be the job of the spiritual teacher to generate that crisis frequently. It's a pretty rare spiritual master nowadays who takes upon himself the creation of crises for an aspirant. They'd slit his throat if he did it very often. It's just not in accordance with our ideas of democratic principle. But nevertheless, after all, this was the principle. And we must recognize that if that was a true principle for thousands of years, even though the role of the master is now superseded, that the avatar must provide that strengthening factor in our lives one way or another. What were you about to say?
I came across a quote today from Baba that said, "Life in an ashram is a bed of roses, but roses have thorns too."
Well, that was a good one. Here's another one down here. Questions of disciple, master, or godhood no longer arise. Disciple, master, or godhood. What do you think? Do you think Baba is saying that in the new era, that this old relationship of disciple to master, let's concentrate just a moment on that. I think this is one of the most pungent statements in all of the things given out by Baba. I think it has enormous implications. I'd like to suggest to you, do you think Baba is predicting the end of the old classic disciple-master relationship for the aspirant? You say yes?
Yes.
I think he is too.
That really seems to tie in with that quote that he's saying, you and I are not we but one.
Yeah.
And really living that oneness without that distinction.
Without that distinction at all, even closer. It's a revolutionary principle. And after all, it's been going on for thousands of years, but isn't that the function of an avatar? It just seems to me, in relation to our deeply enrooted, ingrained concepts of democratic society, this is so contrary to some of the basic precepts of the disciple-master relationship that for the Western world, at any rate, to absorb mysticism, there has to be a change in that ancient classic relationship. And what's it going to be then? And I think this is one of the big things Baba was living through with the Mandali, whom he called what? Not disciples, not Mandali, but companions. And companion doesn't allow for this and that, does it? It means the same level. What would you like to say?
To me, it also foretells becoming an age of intuition.
Absolute key point. Yeah.
Because, and I go back to the first line that says, listen to the silent words of MeherBabaLibrary,
yeah.
which is intuition,
Absolutely.
which comes from ourselves, so that it's really our higher self telling us what to do.
Two other quick comments, and I'm sure I've mentioned these already to exactly the same group. In that address to the press coming to America in the 30s, Baba pointed out that the Kali Yuga age, which was typified by intellect and slow internal spiritual development, is coming to an end with his advent, and that the new spiritual era would be typified by the use of intuition as the major tool. Not that intellect would be discarded, not at all, still use intellect, but a major tool for the new age, the new humanity, the new life would be intuition. The second point was, I remember again and again, and Adele will recall this, as Baba began in the late 50s and early 60s to retire more and more into seclusion for longer periods and to limit more and more the people he allowed to come to him in India. We all complained, Baba, how can we know how to lead our lives when we have so little contact? He said, don't worry, Baba will guide you increasingly, internally, by intuition, obviously. And so it's part of the great new game of the New Age. Yes, John?
I don't feel that because Baba guides us internally and we don't have the benefit of a physical relationship with him, that discards the disciple-master relationship. I mean, otherwise, whom do we love?
Mm-hmm.
Do we just love somebody on an equal plane with us? Do we obey somebody who's entirely equal? Do we obey somebody who knows the same or more? I mean, there certainly is a difference in consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not, maybe we aren't in a traditional disciple-master relationship as it's been in the East and living in an ashram in that sense, but the whole dynamics of spiritual advancement, all these discourses of Baba's, his whole talk about spiritual growth and all, to me implies a relationship with the beloved. And maybe that relationship we can think of as being our brother and our this and our that, but I don't think it discards that notion, at least in my mind, in my heart, the notion of Baba's the master, the beloved, the beloved of my heart.
So John immediately points out, have a care, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't be too eager to get rid of the old master-disciple concept. He says, after all, there is first of all our relationship with Baba and our love and our learning from Baba. And inevitably, you imply, John, that there is someone who knows more than I do. And I am going to learn. Maybe you call it, maybe there's a new way of going about it. But there's still this guy who knows more than I do and who can give to me.
But it seems to me that a lot of the way that the Baba groups that I've been in different places in the country are more towards the fellowship aspect of it. I mean, it's true that internally we see Baba as a master and we have a dialogue with him in that context, but within the physical reality of people, what Baba set up, I believe that what's happening with you and with Phyllis and, the kinds of communities that are growing, Baba had that all in mind. And there's much more of a sense of fellowship than there is, say, in other groups where people are doing a lot of, of this type
discourses from the throne.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
there's the last line of that stanza
is, and this contributes to our present enjoyment of suffering.
Yes, I had underlined that also, and I can't agree more. What would you like to say on that?
Well, I don't know what that means. But,
it sounds pretty masochistic, doesn't it? Yeah. Again, just one of those terribly puzzling things that we've got to come to grips with. But before we go on to that line, what would you want to say on
in the discourses, I believe it is, they talk about there's a spiritual path that weren't before Baba, like was followed by yogis and stuff, and it had kind of signposts, and you could gauge by those signposts maybe how far you were. And then there was coming to Baba and going spiritually under a veil through a path of love, and it didn't have signposts, and you don't know where you are, but you just love. And I think that this line maybe relates to that, and that it's not important to have those signposts. It's not important to know where you are, just to love. And let God take care of the broke.
And I think maybe you're implying that the idea in that case of it is just love, deep, deep, outgoing love. That the idea even of disciple master is almost irrelevant.
That's what I mean. That's what, yeah. The whole idea, it's not, the love is important.
Sure. Shall we go on to that last part of the next line?
He gave us 3 commandments. That was to serve selflessly, sacrifice selflessly, and love selflessly. He didn't say anything else. If we do that, everything else happens.
Which takes a bit of doing. But those can be so difficult to do that maybe we've got to triangulate a little bit from other directions to get there, or to do those. What about that enjoyment of suffering? Is again, on the surface of it, it just sounds nuts.
I feel like the enjoyment of suffering, I mean, if a person is suffering, you might feel something. You're suffering right now, like a certain event, I might be suffering right now, but it could be worse, so I'm suffering for cars, I'm suffering right now, but I might go down the street and get in an accident, It's worse than what I'm suffering right now. You're suffering in them kind of way, a person might be suffering right now, say, oh, damn, I'm suffering, I believe in God and I should be suffering. But he foresee that in order for you to be, let's say not suffer a worse situation, he let you go through an easier suffering, but to you, it seems like the world, it's so hard, but not that hard, just he foresee that it could be even more great suffering.
Sure. So perhaps it's not, let's say, in the sense of enjoying the pleasure, but opening oneself, opening one's heart, and not feeling that the worst has happened, that one should go into rebellion against it. But on the surface of it, Bob keeps saying, there's one last thing that I think we just absolutely, 2 last things. Take a look in 8, the 3rd line. Let despair and disappointment ravage and destroy the garden of your life. Purdom was so shocked by that he changed it. He said in Purdom, and unfortunately we coded Purdom when we put the front part of Tales from the New Life together, and I was shocked when I realized what we'd done. Purdom says, let not despair and disappointment ravage and destroy the garden. But then he goes on and says, you beautify it once again, which then makes no sense at all. But if Purdom is wrong, and Baba did mean, and Ghani did correctly interpret Baba, when he says, let despair and disappointment ravage and destroy the garden. Again, it seems to be, doesn't it? That same concept you have mentioned so many times. All right, the universe, and the pluses and the minuses, and what the avatar has got to put us through, has inevitably got a certain amount of disappointment and despair in it. And if one opens oneself and says, all right, this is part of the scheme, he knows what he's about, can it then possibly be that one gets through it with a lot less breakage and with a lot less grinding of wheels? Just suggested to you. But then we get to the final last little bit. I'm rushing along because I spent so much time telling you about my computer that I didn't get to sit into the song of the New Life quite early enough. For us, however, it is only hopelessness and helplessness. Hopeless we've dealt with, but what about this business of helpless? That's another new disturbing word that Baba tossed. You see how revolutionary this document is?
Well, actually, in the Bible, in the New Testament, it says, consider the lilies of the field. I mean, if you have nothing, you are you are encouraged not to worry in any case. I think it's very consistent with Baba's saying,
if you have nothing,
don't worry.
But what about
just
helplessness? We don't even look to Baba for help here. I think this is what Baba's saying. I can't help myself, and Baba can't help me.
Yeah, but he says,
that's a pretty desperate situation. What does John do when John's in a pickle and all of a sudden he says, God, I've got to say a prayer to Baba because this is beyond me? Isn't he calling upon Baba for help somewhere or another there? Is John doing something terrible?
I'm acknowledging that I'm helpless. I'm not saying that Baba's helpless. I'm just saying that I don't have the power to untie my own knots.
But John, I'm challenging you a step further. Poor John, you got to really down on the griddle. Are you doing right by Baba? Doesn't Baba mean that it's not just you who are helpless, but in this state, Baba himself is also helpless, and you should not ask him for help. Is this the implication of Baba here?
I think so in some part. He states that. I remember reading that he said, really the only prayer is to remember God.
To remember God.
Well, Don Baba said constantly, think of me, I will help you.
But here in the new life, and if we're serious that maybe the new life is the plan for the new age and the new humanity, okay, this is pretty serious stuff. And remember how many times, if you've read the meetings before they set out on the new life, that Baba emphasized, don't look to me for help, spiritual help, and don't look to me if something happens to you and I'm supposed to give you food with my hand and I break my arm, you may starve. I'm not going to help you. This concept of helplessness is something that came up again and again in the planning stage here, and there's a great big snake loose there somewhere. What were you about to say?
Well, I think as the New Life song is read out, in the beginning he talks about hopelessness and helplessness, but then he builds up to this, let despair and destitution destroy the garden of your life, and then the next line is, beautify it with the seedlings of contentment. Again, we get the idea of being in the moment. And self-sufficiency. Now, that certainly isn't helplessness. Self-sufficiency is not helplessness.
It's not helplessness nor lack of it. It's simply there. You're not asking for something there. You're not trying to dredge up. You're just self-sufficient. You can do what is necessary. There's no question of help involved. It's a natural state, Baba seems to imply.
You have everything you need. You don't need help.
He says, okay, if destruction and tornadoes come along and the guy jumps over the fence and tears up your petunias, all right, don't worry. You go out and plant them again. That's natural. You've got all the seeds and the hose and so on. This is the natural state.
If I had to rely on myself, I think I'd be in real deep trouble. I'm sorry, but
Baba's saying you have inside of yourself, all unbeknownst to yourself, all of those resources. And he said, one of these days, gradually, you'll find it. It's there. This is the natural state of the human being. Exactly as you said, contentment and self-sufficiency are the natural state of the human being. And as one gradually lowers one's defenses and starts to allow some of these things to happen, but with a positive sense rather than a negative, rebellious, my God, it's happening again sort of sense, as one gradually lets fear go away, begins to really trust that there is the avatar, that the thing makes sense, he begins to find inside of himself that he has certain natural qualities himself that he never dreamed of.
What about God reliance as compared to self-reliance, though? This is...
And I just replied, frankly, they're the same thing.
One of Emerson's essays.
We're awfully late, and I apologize for having kept you seriously over time tonight. But I think the more I read this document through and puzzle and discuss it with groups, the more exciting it is. It is absolutely a declaration of independence spiritually, and it has the timbre, the force of vibration of the Marseillaise. Think of it that way and drag it out every once in a while. And think of it in relation to the future and what is our responsibility, knowing Baba, in relation to that future. Not just John's personal relationship to Baba, not just, let's say, also boning up on what he says in the discourses and God speaks, but what has he set out, evidently, in the record for the future? What is our responsibility for that future? Another big thing. Last one. Okay.
If you're not the helplessness in in relation to us, including Baba. Maybe he's saying, don't depend upon Baba to perform miracles to overcome the karma that you need for your own spiritual growth.
This he pointed out often before the new life in the discourses, but here I think he's even pushing us a stage beyond that. Anyway, this is a terrific seed document, and the more I run over it myself, the more I begin to understand why day after day he would have it recited out by the companions in the new life. It's important. We should take it seriously. Adele? I can't say no to Adele. You said it was the last one.
My own overall feeling to it all is that is expressed in these words here too, which we haven't read. That Baba says, dear ones, take seriously the words of Baba when he says, although now I am on the same level with you all. This is a phase of his work. Yet all orders from me, good, bad, extraordinary, you should carry out immediately, leaving the result to God. And so
this is what fits in with John's concept.
But also fits in with what Baba was indeed preparing us for, that the presence of God must be such a vital thing that we don't depend on the man form.
Yeah.
That was what I always got from that. Not
So many
depending
times
on the
as
man
Baba says,
form,
I'm
but
a
depending
companion.
on Baba within.
As many times as Baba says, I'm a companion on your own level, but when I say jump, you jump. That is very clear. Let us sit quietly for a few minutes with Baba, shall we?